Welcome to In the News for April 24th, 2026. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Hello, Brett.
Good morning, Jeff. This week, we have heard about the end of an era. Truly. Wow. What some, I mean, for us at least, a little bit of earth-shattering news, not unexpected necessarily, although the timing I was questioning. This week, Tim Cook announced he is stepping down as CEO of Apple. Now, he's got a few months. We'll get into the details and everything. We'll talk about who his successor is, but oh my goodness, I remember I texted you this week as soon as I saw somebody break this story, Jeff. I'm like, what? Like, again, it's not unexpected, but it was just the timing and the fact to actually see it in writing. I'm like, really? Like, okay, I guess it's time. He's going out. Yeah. He's going out on the top of his game,
as the prophecies have foretold. And that's not an accident. I mean, it was a bit of a surprise. When you texted me on Monday afternoon, I was not expecting this news on a Monday afternoon. Not that I knew when it would come.
Right.
But we all heard the rumors that this might be happening last year. Both Mark Gurman from Bloomberg talked about it, but also there was a story in the Financial Times that actually predicted that it could be, as early as this spring. I don't think that was an accident. I think, one of the first things we could talk about is the way that this was done. When Tim Cook took over as Apple, it was not fully planned, right? I mean, they knew it was going to happen, but Steve Jobs was, going to become executive chairman, and then he passed away, and it was tumultuous. And, I think it's very clear to me that Tim Cook, being the orderly person he is, that, wants everything to be calm and everything, he wanted to have a good, smooth transition. And I think step one of that was leaking to the Financial Times last year that he could be stepping down. And then also, I think it was very intentional that Apple leaked to reporters that John Ternus would be the replacement, just so that people could start to get used to the idea for the last couple of months. So that, over time, we would get to the point where people were used to it. And now that the news has come out, yes, it was a surprise on Monday, but, the stock market did not crash because people had been sort of preparing for it, which I think was purposeful.
Well, and obviously, I don't think that it was a surprise to Apple. I mean, they have been talking about this for several years. I mean, we just know, Tim Cook from the outside. He's been planning things. They've been having discussions. So, I hadn't really thought about it in the way that you're talking about, that they've been doing some of these leaks. But I mean, obviously, that's very strategic, right? And I think that that's good that they've been kind of thinking that. So it wasn't too much of a shock. And like you said, that it wouldn't affect maybe even the stock prices or anything else. But all of that aside, I'm pretty happy with the way that it has gone this week, and I just feel like the coverage has been very favorable. I think, again, to your point, obviously Apple had been planning this, and it's. Again, it's an end of an era. It's a little bittersweet, but you and I have talked about this many times, that we suspect that John Ternus is going to be the next person, and I'm pretty happy about that. And I'm very excited about the new era, as it were, coming on board too.
Yeah. So I guess there's two stories to talk about. We have the nature of the announcement. We just sort of talked about that, and that it was handled incredibly well. There is, the looking back at Tim Cook. And then there is the who is John Ternus and what is this going to mean for Apple, most importantly. So why don't we start on the Tim Cook part? Okay. One of the things that I saw this week, Brett, was somebody, and I forget who remarked this, but it was like, one of the things about being the CEO of a big company is that when you retire, you get to read your eulogies while you're still alive, which we have definitely seen this week. Everybody has been, and it's appropriate because Apple has not had that many CEOs in its 50-year history.
Yeah,
Tim Cook was number 7. Nobody really knows much about, Mike Scott for the first 2 years. Nobody talks about him too much. And then Mike Markkula. And then you had, John Scully, who, people have talked a lot about the Scully era, and that, Steve Jobs brought him in. And then ultimately Scully was part of the reason that Steve Jobs got kicked out, I think appropriately so, because Steve Jobs had some maturing to do. And then you had the horrible period in the 1990s of Spindler and Gil Amelio. But one of the best things you can say about Gil Amelio is that when the company was going to flames in the 90s and couldn't even come up with its own next generation operating system. So much so
Right.
after trying to work with IBM and everything else, they finally decided to buy another one. And they were originally going to buy this company called B by John Louis Gasset, another former Apple executive. And then somebody said, hey, you should consider Next. And I mean, that just changed everything. When Apple purchased
Right.
Next, they brought
Right.
back Steve Jobs. And then we have the Steve Jobs era, which was just so incredible. But that leads us up to 15 years ago. And so the Steve Jobs 2.0 era of Apple had just been, from introducing the iMac in the 90s, which saved Apple's bacon, all
Hmm.
the way through introducing the iPhone, which changed literally the world. I mean, Steve Jobs was an incredible leader for Apple at just the right time. And so there was a question of how is someone going to fill Steve Jobs' shoes? There is no one like Steve
Right.
Jobs, right? And
Right.
that's why I
Right.
think Tim Cook was so interesting. He was a completely different type of person. Steve Jobs was that visionary, the person that could like see a million things and pick out the one or two things, the products that people are going to want. Tim Cook wasn't a product guy. I don't think he ever claimed to be. But what he
Right.
did do
Right.
under Steve Jobs is he made sure that the trains ran on time. He, was the in charge of operations, and he made sure that they had
Right.
exactly the right parts when they needed it. Everything was organized. He was methodical. And, 15 years ago, when people were wondering, is this going to be the end of Apple with Steve Jobs passing away? Tim Cook, not in retrospect, has just been an incredible success. I mean, financially is the easiest one. The stock price has gone up a ridiculous amount, the market cap. I mean, if anybody invested in
Right.
Apple when Tim Cook took over 15 years ago, they are now able to
Right.
retire. It's just an incredible what he's done from a financial standpoint. And that's great, but that doesn't interest me as much as, what has happened under Tim Cook. We've had new products like the Apple Watch, which was not only under his leadership, but I think
Incredible.
it
Yeah.
reflects Tim Cook, right? Because I think Tim Cook was very interested
Definitely.
in things like personal, private, and health. And the Apple Watch just encompasses all of that. I mean, it's such an incredible health device. That's something that he has credit for. The so many other things that have been, the
The AirPods. I saw several
AirPods.
stories this
Oh my
week, like
goodness.
where people were even saying like the Apple Watch, but a couple of stories I saw were like the AirPods is Tim Cook's, greatest achievement that he's been able to make. And I don't know that I could
Mhm.
argue so much with that, other than the fact that there are many other products like the Apple Watch and stuff too. But the
Yeah.
AirPods are incredible. All of that whole
And,
line.
and even though Tim Cook has an engineering degree, he's not really an engineer per se, unlike John Ternus, which we'll get to in a second. And so you could say,
Yeah,
well, Tim Cook did not come up with AirPods. He did not come up with the Apple Watch. But I mean, you're the president. The buck stops here. He is the one in charge of the
exactly.
company and made the priorities and stuff like that. And even the Apple Vision Pro, which I know the sales are low now, but I do think it's the future. And I think that he recognized that and he greenlit it. And not everything from his initiatives came out. I mean, Apple
Yeah,
famously spent what $1 billion on the car, which didn't go anywhere. Yeah, haha, sort
right.
of a little joke
They
there.
just
The
killed
car would
it.
not move. They killed it. But I mean, you could argue just the opposite, that Apple had so much money under Tim Cook for the reasons that we just talked about. Um, why not spend a lot of money on the car and decide whether it's worth it? I mean, some people view the car as a failure because Apple never came out with it. But I think you could just as easily make an argument that the car
Yeah,
was a success and that Apple realized it wasn't going to work. And let's stop this. That was a famous Steve Jobs statement is, it's just as
yeah.
important to say what to say no to as what to say yes to. And, when they got far enough along in the car project that they could see that for whatever reason that we don't know, it would, eventually there'll be a book written on this, that it wasn't going to work. He said,
Right.
let's stop. So the successes under him for Apple, and I mean, and it's not just the new products. The iPhone when he started 15 years ago was so vastly different. I mean, think of like the 4 and the 4S.
Hmm.
That the 4 was, by the way, one of the best all-time best iPhones. And the 4S is when Siri came out. That's when Steve Jobs passed away. But if you think about how far the iPhone has come, it's just amazing. I mean, the cameras are amazing, the thinness of it, the everything about the iPhone is amazing, and the iPad, and everything else. And that ramp up, that all happened during Tim Cook's leadership. And so I think you got to give him credit for that. So there's a lot of good things about Tim Cook, right?
Just real quick, when you mentioned the money thing, I immediately go to like acquisitions. the companies that Apple has acquired over the years, I mean, I think Siri was right before Steve Jobs left. But I mean, the first one that comes to mind during Tim Cook's reign is Shazam. And I know there's just dozens and dozens of other companies that we probably don't even know about, smaller companies. But it's just even from that aspect, I hadn't really thought about that component of his legacy. It's just the acquisitions that Apple has done, during that time. And even that's incredible, putting aside even the product side on that as well.
So I don't know how you don't look back and see just amazing accomplishments under Tim Cook.
And then that just quickly, I'm sorry, goes into like the services. I hadn't even thought about how the services component has grown incredible, talk about, I remember when the announcement was made that Tim Cook was taking over. I mean, you and I weren't doing the podcast then 50 years ago, but even then, since I was an Apple fan, I'm like, I don't know how this is going to go. Like, I know that there were people that were not convinced that this was going to go well just because Tim Cook was so different, as you were talking about. But, even just the growth of the services that we've talked about a few times over the last several years. And again, that's under his reign, as it were, right? Like you said, the buck's not, like, they knew that they made some of that investment in that. Today, you look at the Apple TV, for crying out loud. And even, just the whole iCloud ecosystem is just incredible.
Let's talk about that for a second, because services, I really do think Tim Cook gets the credit for that. The famous service, but before Tim Cook, Apple, for all of its incredible hardware and software, had really had problems with services. I mean, the famous story was when Apple came out with, Mobile Me way back when, and it just wasn't working. One of the famous stories was that Steve Jobs goes into a meeting and he tells the people, he says, somebody tell me what Mobile Me is supposed to do. And somebody sheepishly raises their hand and says it does X, Y, and Z. And then he's like, well, why the blank does it not do that? Because it just wasn't working. And so, Apple had this reputation. And then under Tim Cook, when I think of things like photos syncing seamlessly between my devices, when I think of, iCloud syncing, my devices being in sync is so important to my productivity and my personal life. And then there's the other flip of it, which is in terms of a revenue source. You and I both subscribe to Apple One, which bundles a whole bunch of these services together, Apple TV and iCloud, etc. And it is useful. It is useful to us as users. And for Apple, it's important because it means that they don't just see the revenue every time they come out with a new iPhone. They have that steady stream of revenue. And so it allows the company to be more stable. I mean, again, let's not forget, in the 1990s, before Steve Jobs came back, the company was literally months away from bankruptcy. It was going to be the end. I mean, what's the guy that was in charge of Dell said that, famously, what would you do? I would, sell the company and give the money back to the shareholders. I mean, the company was going down the toilet. And to come from that to what Steve Jobs did, which was amazing, and then to come that from what Tim Cook did, which is just incredible. Hardware, services, all just incredible. And I think he deserves a lot of credit. The last 15 years have been amazing. This has
been well reported, right? It's like Tim Cook said that he went to visit Steve Jobs, right? I think almost the day before he passed away. And Steve Jobs was famous for saying, don't ask what would Steve Jobs do, right? He told Tim Cook, it's like, just what was it? Do the right thing, right? Or do what you feel needs to be done. And man, looking back now for the past 15 years, Tim Cook took that to heart. I mean, he's reported this multiple times over his career, right? Or at least as CEO, at least. And it's just, I don't know. I'm smiling just to think about, he really took that to heart, and he must think about that almost every day. That he gets up and he goes, the CEO, he's like, I'm going to do what I believe is the right thing. And that wasn't always what I think Steve Jobs would have done. And that's great.
Yeah. And I love that story. You say wake up every day. Tim Cook famously wakes up incredibly early every morning. I am not the morning person. He very much is. And every morning he has his staff send him like selections of emails that people send him.
Right.
And it's not just the good ones, it's the good, the bad ones. And, he talks about how much he loves almost every day. Someone shares a story about how an Apple Watch saved their life, either themselves or a loved one. But he also gets the stories of, people that are complaining about things. And, I think that is a good and appropriate thing to do as a CEO. And so anyway, I think it's been an amazing run. So, many of the eulogies this week have been glowing. A couple people have used this opportunity to talk about some of the negatives. And I think it's worth mentioning them, briefly. The two big ones that I have seen are the the way that specifically he has dealt with certain governments in the world, including our own. And then
Oh
the
yeah.
second
Well,
one
yeah.
is the Apple in China issue. And so just to address those, because I mean, I don't think I think to be fair, you have to address the bad and the good, or at least the alleged
Sure.
bad. The first one is, epitomized by what I mentioned in my post today when Tim Cook gave the golden plaque to Trump. And it just seems so tacky and so obvious. And so
Cringe.
many people have been upset, cringy, the fact that he gave money to some of Trump's things. And, considering that Tim Cook, I mean, the most prominent gay man in the world, somebody who is so in favor of diversity and individual rights and everything else, has been coddling up to the administration. And I apologize if you're listening to this and you're more of a Trump fan, but there's just been so many things that Trump has done wrong, and Tim Cook has been there, and he's been criticized for that. And I think it's totally fair. Of course, it is appropriate to mention that, but you can't lose sight of the fact that this is also the reality that we live in. And I know, going back to Nazi Germany, should you just go along or should you be helping? I know that those analogies, but
Right.
but Tim Cook is a realist around the world. He understands that if you're going to do business in X country, you need to comply with the laws of the X country. And he has made sure that when, Trump wanted to put ridiculous tariffs and everything, he worked with the administration so that Apple was spared
Yeah.
from it, which meant that our iPhone prices did not go up and people could still afford to
Exactly.
buy their kids a good iPhone and stuff like that. And I think that it's not pleasant to do it, and you can criticize it, but I think it had to be done, and he knew it had to be done, and he was willing to swallow his pride,
Hmm.
because I mean, this will never come out until maybe he retires and he's on his deathbed, but you have to imagine what's going on in Tim Cook's head some of the times that he does some of these dealings. But he
Hmm.
did what he thought needed to be done, and I think he tried to do it in an honest way. And so I give him credit for that. It's not an easy choice. My own law, recently the Trump administration was trying to force law firms to sign these ridiculous agreements and things like
Yeah.
that. Unfortunately, my law enforcement was affected, but I felt, gosh, this could be us. These are
Right.
tough
Right.
situations. There's no easy answers. And then the other one has been the China stuff. And in fact, I got an email yesterday from one of the attorneys that you and I had dinner with when we were in Chicago recently, Jim
Hmm.
Neesett, New Orleans attorney, and he was shooting me this article that was in the New York Times yesterday by Patrick McGee. And Patrick McGee is the person who wrote the Apple in China book, which is an excellent
Oh
book, by the
yeah.
way,
Yeah.
which it talks about how, Apple, could not manufacture the iPhone and other things too, but especially the iPhone in America, because we just don't have the we don't have the manufacturing capacity. We don't have the plants that are
Right.
so close to each
Right.
other. It can't be done. It's not just that it's cheaper. It's not like, oh, you're just going to where it's cheap to have the child labor and make your t-shirts when you could be making t-shirts in America. It's not that. America just literally did not have the infrastructure. And sure, we could build
Right.
it up, but it
Right.
would take 20 years. And I don't know that people would even want those jobs. So he recognized that if you wanted to have the brand new features, it was going to have to be manufactured in China. And so he went to China and he worked with the factories. And at first, the Chinese government was a little resistant to it. And then they realized that their factories were getting better and better because of Apple.
Right.
And so then they encouraged it. And so the criticism that Patrick McGee makes in this article in the New York Times is that China, not only directly from Apple, because there's so much money made from iPhones, but the capacity, the technological knowledge that Chinese
Right.
manufacturing has gained directly because of Apple has led China to be a manufacturing powerhouse in all sorts of other technologies too. And all of that has
Yeah.
resulted in money for the country, which has resulted in helping to keep the regime in China, which people talk about complaining about Trump. Thank goodness we're not in the China's authoritarian regime. And so it is true that, I mean, that has been a direct result, is that China is in a better the Chinese government is in a better financial position because of decisions that Tim Cook made about China. I agree. But people like Patrick McGee in this article, and again, he's no dummy, he understands the pros and the cons too, but he just
Hmm.
points out that this is, hurt democracy in China. It has perhaps hurt other countries to have China more propped up. And I do understand that that was a consequence. But as I pointed out in my post today, I think, and this is just my opinion, people can feel free to disagree with me, no decision in life is all upside and no downside. I mean, it
Yeah.
isn't isn't
Right.
isn't that wonderful when it's an easy decision? But the reason that Tim Cook makes the big bucks is because he has to make those tough calls. I can
Yeah.
make iPhones in America, but they're not going to be able to do what we want them to do. Plus, they're going to be so much more expensive that people won't be able to afford them. And then only the richest
Correct.
people will have iPhones, which I don't think is a good result. Or I can take advantage of and help China. And it's going to mean that we have these incredible devices that change people's lives and allow people to do things. It's going to allow the Apple Watch to literally save people's lives because it's such a small device that can do so much and it can monitor your health. And people that would have died have not died. I mean, not to be dramatic about it, but it's literally true. People that would have
That's
died
right.
have not died. And that is because of the decisions that they made in China. And yes, a side effect of that is that it has helped the current Chinese government. So
Yeah.
those are difficult decisions. And who knows what another leader of Apple would have done. But Tim Cook made the decisions that he thought were in the best interest of number one, Apple, and then number two, and I will agree that this came second, but number two, Apple's users. But with those two decisions in mind, I think that overall, I think he made the right calls. Not that they were always easy calls. But I've heard a number of people this week who have been, complaining and saying, "Oh, we need to get rid of Tim Cook because of all of these different things, and he shouldn't have stayed as long as he did, and everything else." But those were the two big complaints that I heard about him this week.
Well, I think Apple agrees with you that Tim Cook has made the right decisions because while we've talked about the fact that Tim Cook is leaving Apple as CEO, they're actually I feel like they're kind of side loading him as Apple executive chairman. So this isn't actually supposed to take place until September 1st, right? That's when he's actually going to turn over the keys to John Ternus, which, just on a quick side note there, that means that potentially Tim Cook's last public address or public keynote is going to be this summer, right? At WWDC. That's
what I was thinking too.
When he'll do
Agreed.
that. Right. But September 1st is when Tim Cook is officially stepping down as CEO, but he is going into a role of Apple executive chairman, which to me, that's interesting because he's not completely going away. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be involved. And for me, from the executive chairman level, these are exactly the kind of things that I think Apple wants him to continue to do, right? Because maybe Ternus may or may not be the right person for that. Maybe, frankly, to your point that you were just making, Jeff, I don't know if anybody else could do it as effectively as Tim Cook. Just the way that he's wired and the way that, like you said, he just comes to these major worldwide decisions from a balanced perspective. There's really nobody else quite like that has kind of his stature. So it's just interesting to me that Apple he's not going into the sunset. He's going to be right there. And I think that's very smart.
I agree, Brett. I mean, this is like a young child blossoming into an adult, and they are now an adult making adult decisions, but their parents are always there if they want to go talk to them and use their wisdom and advice.
Sure.
And this is it's what Apple wanted to do with Steve Jobs, because this was the same position. Steve Jobs was also going to be executive chairman of the board, and he was for about 2 months, and then he passed away. But in theory, it was going to be Steve Jobs stepping back to focus on his health, but always being there to help with decisions and maybe even make some decisions. And unfortunately, because of cancer, cancer sucks. So and I get emotional because my own parents, my mom recently died of the exact same thing that he had, pancreatic cancer. It sucks.
Right.
But Tim Cook is healthy. He made sure to point that out this week, by the way. He's like, "I'm completely healthy. Everything's good." And my hope is that Tim Cook can be the Apple executive chairman for, who knows, 5 years, 10 years, a long time, which means, first of all, from the chairman of the board position, he will be able to help guide Apple and be there as a resource for John Ternus. But what's interesting is they made the announcement, and it's in this press release that you're showing, that they specifically said that he is going to continue to basically be Apple's diplomat on working with governments around the world, which means working with China because he's got such good relationships there, which means working with the EU because that is such a difficult situation and he knows how to do it.
Lots of going on.
Of course, it means for the next 3 years until we finish this administration, working with Trump and maintaining those relationships. And so, I mean, first of all, how wonderful, because Tim is such an incredible diplomat. He's the best of this. How wonderful that we're not losing that for Apple. That's going to help all of us that enjoy using Apple products. And also, how wonderful for John Ternus that he is not going to have to deal with some of the least. I mean, of course, eventually he'll have to deal with it, right? It's going to be a transition, but wouldn't it be wonderful if they could slowly transition between Tim Cook and John Ternus on those things? And in the meantime, let John Ternus focus on the other aspects of Apple. I just think that it's both an obvious position, this executive chairman
Yeah.
position. But
Yeah.
I just think that this is it's the icing on the cake. This is just what's going to make the smoothest transition even smoother. So good.
It's like no pressure, John Ternus. I mean, I liked how Jason Snell put it here. Ternus has been working at Apple for over half of his life, right? And Jason was like, "Congratulations, dude! Here's the keys to one of the world's most important and valuable corporations. Don't break it."
Don't break it.
I mean,
Exactly.
that's a lot of pressure going on. And again, we've been watching Ternus for a long time, right? It's not like again, this was just decided, 2 weeks ago. They've been sort of grooming him, as you will, and I mean that in a very positive sense. And he's been amazing at what he has been doing. And like you said, he's more of the product guy. And I just have always gotten the sense. I remember we talked about this several months ago. It was one of the videos that he put out, maybe one of the interviews or so, and it was just you just get a good feeling from it. Like he's got a good attitude. He's got a very good head on his shoulders. He's got a very balanced, approach to this. It seems like that he's, very comfortable in sort of the Apple culture, if you will. And I mean that from multiple different layers. Like he understands the importance of the company. He understands the importance of the products, just like Tim Cook. Like he understands how customers approach it. Obviously, he's been dealing with the shareholders and, and the board for a long time, because that's a whole other angle there of like dealing with the board of Apple, right? That's just always something that goes on there. You got to make sure that those folks are happy as well. I just get good vibes from John Ternus all over. And it feels like most people are in that same boat.
Yeah. And I think that there's two reasons, or maybe three, that I'm happy about John Ternus. One is the one that you just said, which is that he understands how Apple does things. And I think that this is important. There are some companies that it works to bring in somebody else from a completely different company. And not only that it works, but it's actually better because they can bring in innovative ideas. I don't think that Apple is that company. That Apple has never, I guess you'd have to go back to John Sculley. When Apple brought John Sculley in from Pepsi in 1983, there were a lot of good things that happened under John Sculley, and he was at the company for 10 years, I guess. But he was never a product guy. And of course, to compare the Apple of the 1980s to the Apple of today is a completely different, thing. But, there were ups and downs of that. But more recently, when Apple has brought in like executive vice presidents or regular vice presidents from other companies, sometimes they've worked, but sometimes they really haven't. They've been real failures because the way that Apple does things is just very differently. I think that to have this good transition, Apple needed to find somebody in the company to raise up. And thank goodness they did with John Ternus. So that's one of the things that's really good about him. A second of the three things that I think is really good about him is his specific part of Apple. I mean, if you want, one of the stories I linked to this week was pointing that if you want to have a good new executive, find the person that's responsible for whatever's going the best in your company and elevate that person, because clearly they're doing the best. And there are two people that are at the top of hardware at Apple. One of them is John Ternus, who's the Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering, and the other one is Johnny Srouji, who's the Senior Vice President of Hardware Technologies. And what do those two things mean? So John Ternus was basically in charge of, everything about the hardware of the iPhone, the Macs, the Apple, everything, you name it. And then Johnny Srouji has been in charge of the chips, really, which is one of the reasons that the iPhone is so good and now the Macs are so incredible, is because we have those M processors. And so both of them together have been responsible for Apple hardware being so good. And, people say, what makes Apple work so well today? And of course, there's things like services too, but, why the iPhone is so good is really mostly, I think, about the hardware. The software is important too, but there are problems with the software. We talk about them all the time. Fortunately, software you can improve more easily over time. But Apple hardware, I mean, as John Gruber pointed out, in the 15 years of Tim Cook, and even going a little before that, Apple has not had a hardware recall. So many companies that make hardware in this scale have these expensive recalls that, we've never had it. We've never had it. And that doesn't happen by accident. It is a well-oiled ship that works very well. And so I really think Apple hardware has been about one of the best parts of the country. And, a lot of the credit for that goes to John Ternus because it's been under him. Ternus is an engineer by training, went to University of Pennsylvania, and he has just worked on all sorts of aspects. When he was first hired at Apple, he was working on Apple's display, but now he's worked on all of their hardware company. Apple is and always has been a product company. We want good
Yeah.
products from Apple. And so having someone with the
Right.
experience of this, it means that he hasn't been as directly involved in services. He's going to have to learn that. That's fine. It means that he has not been as directly involved in software. He's going to have to learn that. But the part of the Apple that is best, the products, he's been doing it. He knows it. And so if you had to pick someone in Apple, I mean, you certainly would not want to pick someone that's in charge of AI at Apple to be the new leader, because that has not gone very well. So I think
No,
that
thank you.
this type of person is the right person to pick. Which then brings to the last reason that I think he's going to be good. And this is the one that you sort of referenced in, is that people really like John Ternus. And I think it's because he's younger.
Yeah.
He's the same age that Tim Cook was when he got this job. And his, I think he's 50 or maybe 51, but right around that age.
Okay.
And
Okay.
he's well liked. People respect him as being really smart. And I think that he reflects the next generation of
Yeah.
leaders. One of the knocks that I have heard about Apple, not specific to Tim Cook, but just the nature of the company, is as good of a job as Tim Cook has done. Tim Cook and the people that have worked under him, those executive vice presidents. I mean, obviously we all get older over time, right? And to a
Hmm.
certain degree, that's good because it gives the wisdom that you have with age, but it also means that you don't have the fresh ideas of people that are younger. Just last night, we were having, right at my own law firm, Brett, we were having an associate retreat that the associates from all the different offices of my law firm were here in New Orleans, and we were doing associate
Nice.
training and stuff like that. And I went to dinner with them, and I was looking around, and it's all of these faces, people mostly in their 20s and maybe even young 30s. And like, I'm thinking, this is the future of Adams and Reese, of my law firm. Eventually, I will be senior and retired, and I'm looking at these people, and of course they're because they're younger, they've got the energy of youth, but there's so many smart people in the room. And I was thinking to myself, you know, I feel like my law firm is going to be in good hands because some of these people in this room will be the future leaders of
Mm,
Apple. John
yeah.
Ternus reflects that. And so a lot of the people who have been senior executives with Tim Cook have either recently retired. We've already talked about some of those recent retirements, or maybe they will be retiring soon. But I think that along with John Ternus, he's going to be bringing in his people. There's going to be new leadership at Apple. And I think from the reports that I've read, it's ready for it. I think that Apple needed a
Yeah.
shot in the arm. And this is why I think it was an appropriate time for Tim Cook. Don't get me wrong, Tim Cook's going out on top. Apple's in his best situation it's ever been right now. But
Right.
I also
Right.
think that you don't want to overstay your welcome, right? How good to leave on top, but then
Oh, oh yeah.
recognize that at some point it's time for someone else to take over. And my hope is, and we'll see what happens, maybe there'll be a disaster that we can't foresee, but wouldn't it be
Mm,
wonderful if John Ternus is there for the next 15 years and he brings that new energy that allows Apple to see new opportunities and make smart decisions and stuff like that? One of the knocks of Tim Cook has been that the AI, Apple has sort of lost its way in AI over the years. But as you and I
right.
talked about just a few weeks ago, Apple might be lucky enough that even though they didn't put all the money in that, like, Google and OpenAI did, it may be that Apple's gonna, through just sheer luck, come out on top, because whatever the model is that other companies
Right.
make, Apple's technology will take advantage of that. Apple recently announced that they're teaming up with Google to incorporate that into the iPhone. Wouldn't it be
Right.
wonderful
Right.
if Apple accidentally backs into what happens to be the most wise AI strategy of all, which is let somebody else figure it out and then take advantage of it. And then John Ternus takes advantage of that. In some of his interviews this week, he was and he made a comment this week to they had like a all hands meeting to the Apple employees where he was talking
Sure.
about it. And John Ternus made this. In fact, you have it shown in the screen right now. You said,
Yeah.
Apple has this incredible. This is John Ternus talking. He says Apple has an incredible roadmap ahead, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is the most exciting time to be building products and services in my entire Apple career. Now, maybe that's
Mm,
just fluff, but he knows what's in the labs. He
he
knows what's
does.
coming out at Apple and next year, 2 years, 5 years down the road. He
Right.
talks about we have unlimited potential. I'm just trying to be the glass half full optimist, but this is what I want for Apple. Thank goodness for all the stuff Apple has done so
Right.
far, but I want it to be even better in the future. And I just have all the happy feelings that John Ternus might be the right guy to get us there.
So, as hardware, overseeing hardware, am I right that he pretty much oversaw the MacBook Neo? release.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
mean, which now, by all reports, like it's almost impossible to even find one now. It's that
exactly.
popular.
Exactly.
And we talked about the fact that this was such a quite a bit of a different approach for Apple, right? That they were coming out with like a $599 laptop. Are you kidding me? That's not Apple's, playground. What are we doing there? But I think that just underscores a little bit of what you're talking about. And then I think you had another story from like The Verge, and it's like this could get you excited. What if Ternus is in, more focus on the product side? Could we finally see a little bit more focus on some products from the smart home potential, right? Which we've been
Hmm.
talking about. It's there. And so many people over the years have said, why can't Apple come in and do a better Wi-Fi router, even at that simple level, or, do some smart lights and stuff like that? I mean, maybe something along those lines. If we saw a little bit of a break from the norm, to your point again, to see like sort of that new leadership coming out with a MacBook Neo, then I'm very hopeful that there could be some additional products there, specifically from the product side. Again, he recognizes the AI side, the services
Hmm.
side. Obviously, he's got a lot of folks, great folks that can help him on that and support that. But it would be nice if you had the product side as well.
Yeah, put those things two together, Brett, because the reason that I think that Apple has not come out with a brand new smart home product, the rumor has been that they've had some ideas in the lab for the last 2 years, but they knew that AI was going to be an important part of it. And because Apple
Right.
hasn't had its act together in AI, they couldn't come up with these products. The rumor is that now that Apple is teaming up with Google and Google Gemini, it will at some point, maybe even later this year, if not next year, come out with a new generation of home products. So put those together. Everything that made
Right.
Apple come up with the MacBook Neo, which is incredibly powerful but lower cost, and all of the new features that can come along with really getting your act together in AI. Can you imagine if the next 5 years, 10 years of Apple is great products at a great cost that are incredibly
Right.
powerful because of AI? I mean, that's it, right? That
Yeah.
that that is what a company
Yeah.
like Apple could be doing, and it means we're going to have a lot of exciting things to talk about on the podcast for the next 5 years. I'll tell you that much. So I just see so much
Very
potential,
cool.
and it's very exciting. So goodness.
Okay. I'd love to just quickly get your thoughts on this because, as people have been thinking about this, there were other fantastic alternates in the wings, right? Eddie
Hmm.
Q, Craig Federighi, Jaws, Greg Joswiak. I mean, there's so many amazing people at Apple. And I got to tell you, I haven't seen that much discussion from folks that like, why wasn't it Eddie Q? Like, why wasn't it Federighi? I mean, there were so many other great folks at Apple that
Hmm.
I think could have filled that role. But I just get a general sense this week, Jeff, that everybody was just like, oh, yeah, well, it's John Ternus. I mean, there wasn't much of a question. In other words, again, I think to your point that you started out with, it was seeded very well, or leaked very well in the beginning. So it wasn't that much of a surprise. And it's just almost as if, hey, we've accepted it. And obviously, other folks that have been around for so long, like Eddie Q and Jaws, I mean, they support it, right? I mean, I feel like this is
Hmm.
this is something that everybody has sort of agreed to, and I don't get a sense that somebody, Craig Federighi is like upset about it or something like that. Maybe they are. They would never say that publicly, I know, but I just get a sense that the entire company is behind this decision.
Yeah, I mean, Federici is about the same age as Tim Cook. So just
Right,
from an age
right.
standpoint, I do think that, and I think we've mentioned this in the past in the podcast, if Tim Cook had been hit by a bus 7 years ago, Federici would have been the person to take over back
He would
then.
have stepped in.
And so
Yeah, that's
I,
probably
I
true.
suspect
Yeah.
that he has been the, in case of emergency, break glass, and he will be the CEO. But now we're at the point when we're looking
Okay,
for the
good
next
point.
for the next 15 years, not him. And you could probably say the same about Joswiak. And some of these people are going to be retiring. Like I'm just looking at this page. Catherine
Yeah,
this is the
yeah.
page of the website that has all the Apple executives on it.
The
Catherine
leadership.
Adams,
Yeah,
the I mean maybe as the attorney, I didn't think about her. She's already mentioned that she's going to be retiring this year, and
that's right.
some
She
of these
did.
other
Okay,
people may be
interesting.
leaving too. And that is part of what I think is the appropriate and natural transition. The one that's the most interesting on this page has been Johnny Cerrugi, because Johnny Cerrugi
Yes,
is a
I was going to come back to
superstar.
that.
He is a
Yeah,
superstar. He is the one that is responsible for Apple Silicon, which has changed so much of the company. And
right,
he is, and we've
right.
seen him give some presentations before on some of those video presentations that we watch every couple of months from Apple. He's
Uh
smart,
huh.
he's good. And one of the announcements that Apple made this week not only is Tim Cook leaving, or not leaving, but changing roles, and not
Right,
only
right,
is John
right,
Ternus being elevated, but Johnny Cerrugi is as well. He is currently senior vice president of hardware. He is going to be elevated
right.
to a C-suite position, as it were. He's going to be the chief
Yeah, I saw
hardware
that.
officer, which means he's going to continue to do everything he's doing now, plus everything that John Ternus had been doing is also going to be under him as well. And it's you
Oh,
think of those C-suite positions, chief executive officer, chief operating officer, chief financial officer. They're going to now have a chief hardware officer, which makes sense for a company like Apple because hardware is so important. But he is going to be
right,
elevated
right.
too. And maybe that's because the two Johns, Johnny Cerrugi and John Ternus, were sort of on the same level. And so if you're going to elevate one to be, the big cheese, the CEO,
Right, right.
you wouldn't want to slight Johnny Cerrugi. So, you should, but also he deserves it too. And hopefully this will mean that he will continue to do all of the wonderful things that he's been doing for the company. So this page of the Apple website, we should almost take a screenshot right now
I
because
know.
in a couple of years, it is going to
It's gonna
change
be all
substantially. And even
changed
though
up.
every one of these people here, I have so much respect for so many of the things that they've done. That's okay. I think it's if in 5 years we see almost completely different faces on this page.
It'll
I
be
mean, this is going to
okay.
be the test for
Yeah.
John Ternus. Is John Ternus going to make the smart decisions to hire the right people, or is he going to hire bozos? I'm sure they're not going to all be hits. I'm sure there's going to be some hits and
Right.
some misses, but that'll be interesting to see what this page looks like in a couple of years and what has come from it.
I even left out Phil Schiller because he's at the very bottom here because he's now the Apple Fellow, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't fully retire, but they just kept him on, I think. But I mean, that would have been another big name that could have come up on that. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Okay. Well, I know we've talked so much about that, but just a couple of other quick stories. I thought this was great that
Hmm.
you linked to in Apple Insider where Apple products are assembled and where the parts come from. I mean, some of this I knew about. We've talked about, different places. You were talking about China, manufacturing. And then over the years, I think to your point again about Tim Cook trying to please, not just the administration here in the United States, but, even state governments, right? And just, I guess, the customer, perception in general about Apple that they've started assembling different products even here in the United States. But I thought this was a great story. This is Marco Sivkovic that in Apple Insider, where it's one story where all of it's put together. And I thought this was good. And frankly, this is some of Tim Cook's legacy, I believe, because he was sort of that operations manager for so long. And, again, you were doing a great job of making the points. It's like, this is something that he has worked on for so much. And it's all of that behind the scenes stuff. And I've always got that feeling that Tim Cook was happy to be the behind the scenes guy. And we just don't know. I don't think we can't imagine the impact I think that Tim Cook has had just on things that we have never seen or never know. We just enjoy the new products when they come out.
Yeah, this is a fascinating article. Again, it's not that it's something you don't necessarily know, but it puts it all together. Where are all the different parts of iPhones and Macs and iPads and everything else? Where do they come together? And so it's really interesting to read the article. But as you say, this article, what a perfect timing this week. Because I mean, you could have copied
Yeah.
and pasted this article and made it a subset of any one of the articles about Tim Cook's
Right.
legacy, because
Right.
this is Tim Cook. This is what he's good at is putting things together, getting in manufacturing done just in time, have everything that
Right.
you need when you
Right.
need it. Things like, buying, all of the DRAM capacity of companies so that when memory prices go up, Apple continues to be locked in on prices, all of these things, and then, displays and everything else. This is what makes Apple products so good. And again, and part of
Yeah.
this is under
Yeah.
John Ternus too, but this is, it's an interesting article in its own right, but it also I think goes right back into the things that have made Tim Cook so successful and also John Ternus so successful in his hardware stuff.
And it's just that Tim Cook understands this, right? I mean, even
Hmm.
just the whole idea, again, you've explained this in the past before, of the chip binning. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the MacBook Neo is so successful in the sense that they had old A18 chips, right, from the iPhones that they had. They didn't just get rid of them if they didn't test out specifically for the iPhone what they wanted. They saved them. And to me, that again, I know that's just one little tiny part of this incredible thing. I can't even imagine sort of, the workflow here, but just the fact that they understood of like keeping that because then they can repurpose those for things that they don't necessarily need. Again, it's not like Tim Cook was the only person thinking about this, but he understood that. So if people would bring that to him as an idea, he had a good understanding of how that could all work for the better, I think, for the company too.
Yeah, completely agree. It's the, use all parts of the animal as it were, you make the most of everything, be productive. And Apple,
Oh,
no other,
it's
no,
like how to
none of
kill the
Apple's
whale.
competitors. Yeah, none of Apple's competitors have been as successful as Apple. And it's all part of the reason that Apple has been successful financially, and all part of the reasons
Yeah,
that Apple
yeah.
gives us the products that are so valuable to our lives, to my law practice, to people's personal lives and everything else. It all comes together.
Well, one of the many reasons that I think Tim Cook is being smart about when this is happening is that we just got through talking about the 50-year birthday of Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And he stayed through that, right? I think I would just guess that he made a purposeful decision like, no, I want to be here. Was it 2 or 3 weeks ago that they had that great interview, from the Wall Street Journal? Was it Ben? I can't remember his name now, one of the journalists there that were doing a great job of like doing an interview of Tim Cook. And I just remember he specifically showed Tim Cook the first time that he was mentioned, or some article from like the early 2000s or something like that, and Tim Cook's like, oh, I need a copy of that. I mean, I think Tim Cook stayed, at least to some extent, that he wanted to make sure that he celebrated that 50 year. And I just thought that was great. And that brings me to your little video at the bottom here, because there's been many celebrations of Apple's 50th anniversary and 50th birthday, not the least of which is they brought Paul McCartney to Cupertino, to the Apple spaceship, to do a concert on the grounds. And this little video, I just think is great. I think this comes from Paul McCartney's people, but it highly features Tim Cook. You see Eddie Q in there, and it's like Tim Cook is just like a happy little fanboy. There's even a picture or one shot of him when he's in the backstage of Paul McCartney, giving this concert to, thousands and thousands of Apple employees at the Loop. But he's just like taking photos. He's just so thankful that Paul McCartney was there to help celebrate. And they're walking together, right? And another memory is Paul McCartney remembers like when the Beatles were, plastered as part of some promotional marketing campaigns with the iPhone. And it's just cool that Paul McCartney remembers all that.
Yeah, I don't think it was the iPhone. I think it was iTunes. Famously, the iTunes was trying to sign up
of
artists,
of course,
and they weren't on it. And then eventually, Apple did seal the deal so that the Beatles were on iTunes. And then they had a special version of an I think then they have a special version of an iPhone. You can get the Beatles iPhone or something like that. I say iPhone, iPod.
There was something, yeah.
But what Paul McCartney was referring to, and I can almost picture it. There was a great image of the Fab Four, of the four Beatles. But as Paul McCartney mentions in this video, it's an image that Paul remembered, but wasn't a very popular one. It wasn't one that people would often use. But Steve Jobs picked it, and he's like, "I'm so happy you picked it because it's such a great photo."
Nice.
We talked about this last week too, or 2 weeks ago, that Paul McCartney was a perfect artist to perform for Apple's 50, because Apple, the Beatles have been such an important part of Apple one way or the other for we talked about those stories, but also I know that Steve Jobs and everybody, loved Paul McCartney so much and loved the Beatles. And so, I realized that they were able to get him because Paul McCartney happens to be on tour right now, and he happened to be in Los Angeles recently. So it made sense for him to add this to the tour. But this is a very fun, like if you haven't watched this video yet, it's only 3 minutes long.
It's 3 minutes, right?
If you want to smile, just watch this video for 3 minutes. It's going to make you smile. It's just going to make you smile.
Yeah, I feel like I've already spoiled several things, but it's just fun to watch.
There's so much more in it. Yeah,
they're going through that glass case where they're seeing all of the generations of the iPhone, and Paul McCartney just kind of offhanded, he's like, "Oh yeah," he like points to the very first iPhone. He's like, "Oh yeah, Steve Jobs gave me the first iPhone in England."
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like Tim Cook was like, he's like, really? Like what? And it's like, yeah, just offhandedly, Tim Cook was happy to give me the first iPhone free. And I'm like, okay, you're just fronting now. That's great.
Great video. Great video.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, we could just keep going on and on. I appreciate you talking about, Tim Cook. I mean, it's been just a little bit of a whirlwind week, just in kind of grasping that and getting my head wrapped around that. But I'm excited. I mean, for all the things that we were just talking about, I'm excited. I think it's going to go well. and it's going to be fun to see the next 15 years on there. And
Indeed.
yeah, that'll be good. All right, well, we've been spending a lot of time on that. Let's jump to it in the know real quick. Let's
In the
just do
know.
a couple of little tips, because I saw you were going to do a tip on GoodNotes, which is your preferred note-taking app on the iPad. And I keep testing it out because every time you talk about it, I'm like, should I switch? And I love it. And there's nothing against it. It's just I think I started with Notability a little bit before that, Jeff. And so we've talked about this many times. I continue to stay in Notability, if nothing else. It's just that's where all my notes are right now. Well, I'm traveling again, and I've been at a conference. And yesterday, I was absolutely using Notability to take notes during this conference. They had like a schedule, a PDF agenda, and I just like sucking that into Notability as a background, and then I could just add pages so that I could make all kinds of notes on this agenda. Well, now that I have the new M5 iPad Pro and I have a brand new Apple Pencil, I say brand new, it's maybe 4 months old or something like that, continuing to love it so much. But we've talked about this. There's a couple of gestures you can do on the new Apple Pencil Pro. One of them, which has been around, I think, even for the previous generation of the Apple Pencil, was you could do a double click on the pencil. And that worked out well. And one of the things that I used, exactly, you do a click, and you can go into the Apple Pencil settings in the settings app on the iPad, and you could change that. You could do like change it to the last used tool and then switch it back. Or you could, what I typically did is, especially in Notability, I would be writing with a pen, and then I would do tap on the Apple Pencil, and it would switch to the eraser. And I would erase, and then I could tap so it could go back to the pen. Or in some cases, Notability allowed you to just automatically go back to the pen. Now, that's great, and it worked fine. But with this new Apple Pencil Pro, not only is there the double tap, which you can go and set, but they also have a squeeze gesture. Now, the squeeze gesture, I think by default, they have it to where if you squeeze it within an app, for example, it'll bring up what they call like the little palette. I think it's a tool palette, right? So you could do an undo or something like that. If you do that in Notes, in the Apple Notes app, you can do that. But I got to tell you, I went in and changed this so that my squeeze gesture on the Apple Pencil Pro is erase. Now, you might be thinking, well, you use the double tap for that instead of the squeeze. But I found that the squeeze gesture, at least for me, Jeff, it just was a little more intuitive, because if I did the double tap, I usually have to pick the pencil up, right? And I'm like, I have to like make sure that my fingers are at the right place where I could do the double tap. I mean, today, the Apple Pencil Pro, the newer version, you don't really have to. I feel like the previous version, you had to be in the right place to do that double tap. But instead of doing the double tap and lifting my finger off, you could just simply do a squeeze gesture. And I found that this works a little bit better for me when I want to erase. So I'm writing, and I need to erase something. I just don't pick the pencil up. I don't pick my finger up. I just simply squeeze it in place. I do my erase, and then I let go of the squeeze gesture, and I can continue writing. For whatever reason, for me, that just feels a little more natural. It doesn't, I feel like I'm not interrupting my writing flow as much with the squeeze gesture. So that was my tip. You can change this either in the Apple Pencil Pro settings in the iPad settings app, or Notability, I think, has one or two extra little settings that you can change in the Notability app. But just tries that. If you've been doing a double click, which I love doing the double tap on the Apple Pencil, and if you've got a newer Apple Pencil Pro, try using the squeeze gesture, and maybe like me, you'll find that that's just a little bit more consistent. I feel like it just doesn't interrupt that flow as much as the tap did. And it's not like the tap was in my way. It's just I find that the squeeze gesture works a little bit better, and I like it.
I'm so glad you shared this tip, because of the two things you can do in the Apple Pencil, the double tap tip and the squeeze tip, I noticed when I looked at my settings, you go to the settings app and you choose Apple Pencil, I had squeeze turned off so that it wasn't doing anything at all.
Oh,
and the reason for that is way back when I had found, I guess I just found that I wasn't liking the squeeze gesture. And so I'm like, double tap works for me for switching pens and switching to the eraser. So let me just do that. But I've just turned it on while you've been speaking. And I have to admit, everything that you just said is right, that as easy it is for me to double tap to change to the eraser, you do sort of have to lift up your pencil a little bit, double tap, and then write again. Whereas when you use the squeeze gesture, I can write a word, T-E-S-T, and then immediately squeeze, and I can keep my Apple Pencil right where it
And
is. And then, of course, when you're done erasing, it switches back to the tool. I have to admit,
when you let go of the squeeze. Yeah.
I agree with you. It is faster.
Good.
And I've now got it turned on. I'm going to try it. I don't, it's been so long since I turned it off that I don't remember why I did. But actually, it's a pretty good feature. And of course, you could even make them different too. Like if you want, you can make squeeze, switch to the eraser, and tap could do something else like switch to the last tool, which may not be the eraser.
Correct. Correct.
So that is a really good feature. Some of the other things that you can do in Apple settings don't actually work in GoodNotes. They do work in the Notes app. Like one of them is like you can take it when you squeeze or do another gesture, it'll bring up the color palette. I don't know about Notability, but that actually that does not work in GoodNotes, because in GoodNotes the color palette is always at the top of the screen. It will work in Apple's built-in Notes app. So anyway, that is a good tip, and I'm glad you shared it.
Yeah, try that and see.
I'm gonna keep it turned on for the next week or two, and maybe I'll be with you. Maybe I'll be team gesture instead of team double tap. We'll see.
I remember like when it first came out, because I did the double tap, and maybe I'm a very squeezy writer. I don't know. And I remember when that squeeze gesture first came out, Jeff. Maybe this is why you turned it off too. I found that I would start hitting that accidentally, but I've just gotten to the point now to where maybe I'm not I don't squeeze as hard when I write, or I just can understand, when, because it gives you a little bit of haptic feedback when you do that squeeze. So when you're actually doing it on there. But anyway, I've gotten used to it, and that's the way I do. So good. I'm excited for you to try that out and see, because I know you do a lot of writing of notes.
I do. Some of my favorite tips are the ones where you're giving me a tip. And if everybody else can join from it too, that's great. So thank you for that one. My tip is, so as you said, you saw that I was going to have a tip about writing. And again, GoodNotes is the app that I use. GoodNotes added a feature last month that I have been using so much that I'm like, how did this not exist before? I'm so happy. And the feature is called locking objects. And what it is, let's say, let me give you a use case. Okay. I may have my I have like a blank page, right? That I'm going to write some notes. And sometimes I'll just be handwriting notes, but oftentimes what I will do is I will take something else. Like, let's say, for example, I'm right now I'm preparing for an oral argument that I have in 10 days. And so I will go into like my Westlaw case, and I will have like a paragraph that I might want to quote a sentence from when I'm talking to the judges. And so I will take a screenshot, and I'll crop it so it's just that quote, and I'll paste it into my GoodNotes. Okay. So now I have my page, and then on top of it, I have pasted an object. And then on top of that, I might want to use the highlight tool to highlight in yellow, or to underline in red what I want to read. All that works fine. But when I'm preparing oral arguments and doing other things with notes, I will often be moving things around, and like, I was going to do this up here, but now I want to do it down there. And when you're moving things around and you use the selection tool, sometimes the selection tool doesn't do exactly what I want, and I end up moving something that I didn't intend to move. And I will tell you, if I have pasted a snippet from a case and I have highlighted on top of it, and I accidentally move the snippet of the case, well, then my highlights, which stay in the same spot, are in the wrong spot, right? And so like I want to make it that whatever I pasted stays there forever. Or another example, I might, like, for example, if I might copy some text on the internet or on a Word document or wherever it is, paste that text into GoodNotes, and then I'm going to write things over and above it and highlight and stuff like that. But I want that text to stay in place and never move until I want to move. And this is what Lock Objects does. When you have anything, whether it's a text box or a picture or whatever, you can just tap on it, and you bring up, the way it works in GoodNotes is there's like a little menu at the right. When you tap on something, it's got a circle with 3 dots. And if you tap on that circle and 3 dots, there's a new option called Lock Image. And then once you have locked an image, I can no longer move it. Which means I don't have to worry about accidentally moving it, unless and until I tap on the image, and I specifically, there's a little lock item. I tap it again to unlock it. And I cannot tell you, since this feature has come out, when I was using it extensively, as I was getting ready for Tech Show last month, I was doing a lot of things just to write notes, and I just found it so useful. And so it has, how can GoodNotes, which has been around forever, come out with a feature in 2026 that completely changes my use of the product? Bravo, I have to say, bravo. So if you use GoodNotes, definitely use this feature for other programs like the one that you use, Brett. I don't know if you already have a feature like this, and if not, I hope that Notability copies it.
I'm just checking,
because it's so useful.
Yeah, you and I talk about these two apps so often. And what I've seen over the years is that if one of these apps comes out with a feature, it's a good bet that the other app's going to come out with another feature. And sure enough, I don't know who came out first on this time, but I went in Notability and I'm like, because I want to do that in Notability. And sure enough, I tap on it. There's a little padlock icon is one of my
So
options.
you know what
there.
I'm talking about.
Tap
Okay.
it. And I do now. And thank you. Now I'm going to be using that because you're right. So often I will put in some kind of image or a screenshot, or I even take a picture of
or
something and
text
put
or
it
whatever.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it will move, but I was like, I don't want it to move. I want, I don't want to I want to plant it there and I want it to stay there while I write about, oh man, this is great. This is
Yeah, it's a really
fantastic. Yeah, it's right
Plus,
there.
it's nice because like I might have something that I've pasted and I might have some annotations above and below, and I might want to select all of those annotations
Oh,
and move
that's
them all
great.
en masse, but keep the underlying
Yes.
thing there. It's just it's a really useful feature. So I love
Oh, that's
taking
brilliant.
handwritten notes with my iPad. I do it all the time, and thanks to these powerful tools, this is just great stuff. Great stuff.
Man, okay, so I had a tip that you are using. You have a tip that now I'm going to be using. This is wonderful. This is always the best on that.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you for joining today and talking about Tim Cook. I feel like I don't even want to say legacy because it is a legacy, but he's not going anywhere. So he's still going to be there, but it is a little bit of a different era. And I got to tell you, I am looking forward to this summer now, with him giving his sort of his last keynote. And obviously, I feel like John Ternus is going to be featured in prominently even this summer, which is one of the big, times that we do a presentation. And yeah, we'll just see. We'll see how it goes. It's going to be an exciting time the next few months, Jeff, to be talking about this. So thanks for joining as always, and we'll talk.
Years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
We'll talk with you next week then.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.